the self-driven buyer's journey is a really, really big deal. And I think that's what's throwing most companies in this segment for a curveball. What is the self-driven buyer's journey all about? The self-driven buyer's journey means essentially that your prospects and clients are doing so much research on their own before they ever get to an initial meeting with someone from your team that their research and decision-making process is almost over before you meet a potential client. Almost over. Gartner found 83% of a typical journey is now over before someone is meeting with a member of your sales team for the first time. 83%. It didn't used to be this far over. It used to be 10 years ago that about half of that research and decision-making process was over before vendor contact or sales contact. At the time, CEB, the Corporate Executive Board, did research with Serious Decisions and Salesforce and found that 56% of a typical journey was over before vendor contact and sales contact. We're now at 83%, and it's only shifting more and more to the right. So if you sell to highly technical IT professionals, facilities professionals, developers, very, very highly educated, skeptical, cynical, not big fans of marketing and sales, you need to work extra hard to earn your way in early and often, in the right places, at the right time, with the right people, and most of all, in the right context, so that you and your client-facing team members are seen as the be-all, end-all experts when it comes to anything and everything happening. I'm Joshua Feinberg from DCSMI, the Data Center Sales and Marketing Institute, and I want to welcome you to this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A live show, where each week I tackle a handful of the biggest sales and marketing challenges that we're hearing about from all over the data center ecosystem, regardless of whether you're from a data center operator like a colocation, hyperscale, edge, modular, or wholesale data center provider, or maybe you're part of a data center technology related or facilities related company, or perhaps you do something related to construction, real estate, or investment in and around data centers, digital infrastructure, or critical facilities, or maybe you do something in outsourced sales and marketing in and around digital infrastructure, data centers, and critical facilities. And regardless of where you sit on the team, perhaps you work in sales or as an account executive, as a business development rep or a sales development rep, or maybe you work in some kind of marketing related job or account management or CSM, client success, or product or channel partnerships, or perhaps you are the executive sponsor, the executive leader, the orchestra conductor, the maestro who is responsible for making sure that you get the right people sitting in the right seats on the bus, rowing the boat at the same speed, playing their musical instruments at the same tempo, at the same volume, to be able to have your team participate in this amazing period of growth that we're experiencing now in anything and everything related to data center infrastructure. If this is the first time you're joining us for Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A, welcome. If this is your second time or you're a frequent flyer, welcome back. We're thrilled to have you with us. So what is on the agenda for this week? First up, we're going to look at how a colocation, cloud services, and managed IT solutions provider can find qualified prospects. After that, we'll turn our attention to how a data center energy sustainability consultancy can lessen the need for repeat prospecting calls. Then we'll talk about how edge data centers can keep their pipeline full in distributed locations. That'll put us at the halfway point where we'll take a real quick break for a message from our sponsor. And during the second half of this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show, we'll talk about how a high availability colocation data center business can grow. Next, we'll talk about how to build a robust modular data center sales pipeline. And as we head down the home stretch on this week's show, we'll talk about how to generate inbound opportunities for an energy efficient data center solutions company. If you want to stay up to date on new educational events and resources just like this, make sure that you are subscribed to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter that comes to your email inbox each Sunday. You can subscribe. You can sign up directly on our website at www.dcsmi.com. And if you have an idea for a topic, a question, a challenge, a stressor, a struggle, a goal that you and your team are working on that you'd like to consider adding in the consideration queue for an upcoming show, make sure to add that in the comments wherever you're watching. So without any further delay, let's jump into this week's first question, which is, how does a colocation, cloud services, and managed IT solutions provider find qualified prospects? How does a colocation, cloud services, and managed IT solutions provider find qualified prospects? That is a fantastic question, because for some of those three segments, colo, cloud services, and managed IT, you're in some pretty mature business categories, businesses that have existed for well over a decade. So if you're not super careful, you can potentially struggle a lot with differentiation and face commoditization, which can make your job way, way, way more difficult. Before we can look at what it means to find qualified prospects, we have to get clear on who your best clients are. For that, we're typically going to look to your website and look for like a case studies page or reviews or logos or testimonials. And we're trying to figure out what your most successful clients have in common. And from that, we should be able to back into defining your ideal client profile, your ICP. So for colocation, cloud services, and managed IT, the first thing that we need to get our mind around is, are we primarily selling our facility being in a certain proximity to where our clients are located, or are we selling to a national, a regional, potentially a global audience? And for a lot of co-location providers that have a single location, they're like two different playbooks going on. They're mostly investing in generating qualified prospects in their local community, and they dip their pinky toe in the pool ever so slightly when it comes to digital, when it comes to global marketing, when it comes to lead generation, when it comes to all things with growing their client base that is significantly beyond being able to drive to the facility within 30 to 60 minutes. If you have multiple locations across a single region, if you have multiple locations spread out across the country, across the continent, across globally, then you likely have a more sophisticated playbook that has both a digital virtual long distance component as well as a local proximity, hyper-local type of components there as well. So the first thing we need to get our mind around when it comes to your ideal client profile is, are we able to sell colocation, cloud, and managed services, managed IT, to the exact same kind of client? Or do those three different lines of businesses require three different go-to-market playbooks, three different marketing and sales strategies? If it's three different ones, okay, so you need to work with. If it's one client that largely buys all three of those lines of business, colocation, cloud services, and managed IT, then it gets quite simpler. If we're looking at that more simple situation, your ideal client profile will have a geographic component. If you have a single location, again, most single location co-location operators, because they're spread thin from a resource constraint and have difficulty taking a long-term perspective on marketing and sales, they're usually focusing very heavily on what's right in front of them, hyperlocal. And for hyperlocal, yes, define geographically, define company size, how big or how small they are, be self-aware about where you can actually win, both initially and on an ongoing basis with land and expand and retention. How big do they need to be to afford your minimums? In other words, can you realistically be selling to a pre-revenue startup or a company with just a handful or two of employees, or do they need to be at 10 employees or more, or 50 employees or more to be able to afford your minimums? And also be self-aware at the other extreme. How big of an enterprise can you realistically market, sell, and support for colocation, cloud services, and managed IT? Can you really sell to a company with 50,000, 100,000 employees, or beyond 1,000 employees? Does it become really, really difficult for your company to be able to effectively run the marketing, run the sales process, run ongoing support, meet their financial requirements, their compliance requirements, all of the other integration requirements that come along with having a Fortune 500, Fortune 1000 enterprise type of client? So get specific geographically about where they are, how big or small their companies are, and are there certain industries, are there certain sectors where you tend to do better than others? This is a really big deal with a company that is principally in the business of colocation, cloud, and managed IT, because when you layer that business model in with certain locations, certain kinds of certification requirements, accreditation, compliance requirements tend to come up, especially in highly regulated industries when you get into areas like healthcare or financial services or education or government or something like that. So get that ideal client profile right. Where are they located? How big or small are their companies? And what industries are an especially good fit for you? And what industries, by virtue of you not being able to meet those compliance, accreditation, certification type of things, are going to likely disqualify you sooner rather than later? So let's get really, really clear about those particular facets. Next thing is, once we have that in mind, who are the people in those accounts that we need to build relationships with, that we need to educate and build trust with? The most important economic stakeholder, we're going to call that person your primary buyer persona. And again, it's the same question that I raised a few moments ago. Is it the same decision maker? Is it the same stakeholder internally that you're selling colocation, cloud services, and managed IT to? Or are there more than one stakeholder? And a lot of the answer to that question isn't going to just vary depending on how much you've integrated those three lines of businesses versus selling them separately. It's going to depend on the size of their company. In other words, a 50-person manufacturing company likely has one or two people working in IT. In other words, it's not a really granular segmentation strategy as to, okay, do I want to get the IT director, or do I want to get the support person or the network administrator or something like that? Like, everyone knows each other. It's really not a big deal to be that precise about whether I get to person A or person B, because it's a two-person IT department. When you're selling to a 5,000 or a 50,000 person company, and there's hundreds of people that work in IT, or perhaps even more, then yeah, we need to get a lot more specific in that segmentation strategy of who the primary buyer persona is, who the secondary buyer persona is. Maybe there's a third category of stakeholder that we need to educate and build trust with as well. And in order to do that, we need a lot of clarity about what their biggest goals and challenges are when it comes to anything and everything that's going to directly lead to them at some point in the near future realizing that they need colocation, cloud services, and managed IT. So again, depending on how tight your services are, your products are integrated within your own company, and depending on how big or small they are, you may need a more finely tuned segmentation strategy or a less finely tuned segmentation strategy. But either way, we have to know their biggest goals and we have to know their biggest challenges. And we need those expressed in their own words, not what you think their words are, but what their words actually are. Because that's the difference between everything resonating and everything falling completely flat. If you want your website copywriting, your sales enablement, your product marketing, your email marketing, your social media posts, your digital ads, your event strategy, your educational event strategy, if you want everything to resonate, it is incredibly important that we get clear about who they are, what they care about, and how they articulate those biggest goals and challenges in their own words. So we must do the actual research and document that, because that's going to drive everything going forward with finding qualified prospects. The second part of that is, not only do we need to know their biggest goals and challenges, we need to be very, very aware of the self-driven buyer's journey. The self-driven buyer's journey means that when it comes to selling to hyper-technical, very cynical, very skeptical IT decision makers, they don't want to talk to someone from your sales team until they're just about ready to buy, if they're going to talk to them at all. And this is very different than as recently as 10 years ago. If we were talking about this 10 years ago, it was very common to find that about half of their journey, half of your sales cycle was over before they were willing to have contact with an account executive or a sales development rep or someone similar to that on your team. At the time, 56% of the typical journey was over before sales contact or vendor contact. That was research done by CEB, the corporate executive board that's now owned by Gartner. Add 10 years of digital transformation, millions of baby boomers retiring, tens of millions of people working from home in the beginning of the 2020s, millions of people continuing to work from home. And all of that digital transformation has led that 56% number to jump all the way to 83%. Yet Gartner's latest research, 83% of a typical buyer's journey researching, comparing options, and evaluating pricing now happens without you being in the room. 83%. So that means that even if you do everything perfectly, you're only in there for the final 17%. And wow, is this a big challenge for a lot of traditional companies, traditional sales and marketing teams in and around colocation, cloud services, and managed IT. But it also opens up an enormous opportunity for you and your team if instead of being perceived as a vendor, you're instead seen as a consultant, as a teacher, as a subject matter expert, as a trusted business advisor, perhaps even a thought leader when it comes to anything and everything that's relevant to how this particular buyer persona from a company in this geographic region of a company roughly this size in a particular industry navigates all of their IT infrastructure decision-making when it comes to the biggest goals and challenges that at some point lead to a purchase decision around colocation, cloud, and managed IT. And the better job you do at understanding and empathizing and changing all of your content and all of your educational events to focus on getting in early and often with the right people in the right places at the right time, and most of all in the right context, the more you will successfully transform your legacy client-facing team members, especially in sales and marketing, into the kind of experts that your prospects and clients actually want to spend time with. And in the self-driven buyer's journey, where there may be as many as 28 touch points between complete stranger and purchase decision, the better job you can do with your educational resources, with your email marketing, and most of all, with your educational events. So you insert yourself into your prospects' workforce redevelopment, professional development, learning and development strategy, so that the most important buyer personas are excited about spending time with client-facing members of your team because they're learning so much from them. And that is the key unlock to finding qualified prospects that are relevant to a company in colocation, cloud services, and managed IT. Is we have to know a very tight definition of who the company is. We have to know an even tighter definition of who the most important stakeholders are in that company and what they care about. And then going forward, we need to create amazingly helpful educational resources and educational events that allow ourselves to insert ourselves into the consideration set over and over and over again throughout the buyer's journey. And when we do this really well, you'll know it's working because you start to see the initial person that registers to download your ebook, that subscribes to your newsletter, that signs up for your webinar, that registers to attend your breakfast seminar. You start to notice that when you prompt them that, hey, when it comes to colocation and cloud services and managed IT, it truly takes a village. There's typically stakeholders involved from infrastructure, operations, compliance, finance, cybersecurity. So with that in mind, who else would benefit from reading this? Who else should watch this? Who else should attend this event? And when your messaging, when your value, when your client centricity is really, really resonating, you start to notice that multiple stakeholders from the same company are registering. Like you look down at your lead registration confirmations, where you got this, maybe it's coming in an email, maybe you're looking at your CRM, you're like, wow, it's really interesting. 5, 6, 7 people from the same company are signed up to attend our lunch and learn next week. That's awesome. They're talking about us. And when 4 or 5 of those 7 people actually attend and they're really, really enjoying and interacting with your team and getting a lot of value, not only are you educating and building trust individually, you're solving one of the biggest possible challenges that frustrates so many account executives in sales development. You are driving alignment across multiple stakeholders from the same company, which is a really, really important part of account-based marketing. So the better job you can do with taking all of that into account, the better job you're going to do as a colocation, cloud services, and managed IT solutions provider that wants to find qualified prospects, because we don't just want qualified prospects. We want qualified prospects that are going to turn into our amazing future clients that are with us for life. So that's how I would address how a colocation, cloud services, and managed IT solutions provider can find qualified prospects. If you're getting good value from this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show, make sure that you hit the like button to help spread the word. So what do we got up next? What's our next question for this week? How does a data center energy sustainability consultancy lessen the need for repeat prospecting calls? How can a data center energy sustainability consultancy lessen the need for repeat prospecting calls? Yeah, that is a fantastic question, because sustainability consultants should also be practicing sustainable go-to-market. And what does sustainable go-to-market look like for these times? What is going to be the most successful playbook that you can use for getting great consulting clients for your energy consultancy, energy consulting firm, without having to repeat yourself over and over again with prospecting calls? What a lot of this comes down to is really understanding who they are and what they care about. So who they are, the smaller your firm, the more precise you need to be, the more granular you need to be about who you're actually targeting. You can't, as a small consulting firm with a couple handfuls or less of employees, or even a few dozen employees, you really do need to be laser focused in picking your battles and determining where you can help the most. It's really, really hard to boil the ocean as a relatively small firm. If you're a huge consulting firm, then yeah, more than likely your leadership team is doing the same thing, except they've divided up into territories and teams that are targeting specific kinds of industries in a specific geographic region. But if you're a relatively small consulting firm, it is even more important than ever for you to get really sharp, really precise about who they are and what they care about. So for the who they are, let's make sure that you have a one-page, really tight, ideal client profile. Geographically, where are they located? Can you truly provide energy sustainability consulting all over the world? Or are you better suited to provide that consulting in a particular geographic region, in a particular country, in a particular group of countries? So get really tight about that. And that's going to be a combination of where you're located, where you have team members located, how familiar you are with the energy and sustainability ecosystem, landscape, environment, and trends in that area. From a practical standpoint, can you provide consulting in more languages than just English? Are you familiar with the local regulations? Is it feasible? Is it cost effective for you to travel to visit clients there on a regular basis? All of those factors come into account for the geographic part of your ideal client profile. Next, what size is the right fit for you? In other words, are you able to make the most progress with your sustainability, with your energy consulting in a relatively small company, in a mid-size, mid-market kind of company, or in an enterprise company? So again, only you can answer that question of where your most successful clients have come from and what they all have in common. But be self-aware, be realistic about where you can make the most traction with your marketing and sales process and consulting services delivery. It has to do somewhat with your product, your package services offering, like what your minimum is. How big do they need to be actually be able to afford your services? And second, at the other extreme, at what point would a client be so large that they would overwhelm your company's ability to be effective at delivering significant transformation when it comes to energy sustainability? So what's the range? Number of employees. Define that as part of your ideal client profile. For a lot of relatively small consulting firms, maybe it's something like I don't know, 50 employees up to 500 employees, or 50 employees up to 1,000 employees, or something like that. This is essentially defining your addressable market as part of your ideal client profile. And then what industries are more conducive to your services offering, your consulting services offering than others? Are there certain industries that are a great fit? Are there certain industries that are a terrible fit? And once you have that ideal client profile defined geographically, company size, industries that are a great fit, industries that are a terrible fit, then you should be able to build out a target account list of very specific companies who you'd love to have as your clients. This could be anywhere from a few dozen to a few hundred. In some rare cases, it may be a few thousand, but it is a finite list of companies that you would love to have as a client for your consulting firm. So that's at the company level, that's at the account level when it comes to avoiding the need for repeat prospecting calls. Within those accounts, we need to know who the people are. Who's going to care the most about the kind of issues, the kind of problems that you address with your data center energy sustainability consulting? The most important economic stakeholder, we're going to call that person your primary buyer persona. The second most important kind of stakeholder, that particular person, that job role, that job function, or collection of job functions, we're going to call that your secondary buyer persona. Over time, you may find a negative buyer persona, a certain kind of character, for lack of a better word, that shows up as a detractor in your process, in your marketing and sales process, that when they show up, it's like the kiss of death to your engagement moving forward. And in larger enterprise accounts, there may even be a third or fourth kind of stakeholder. But once we have that segmentation down, then in priority order, we need to go one by one and figure out what that segment cares the most about. What are their biggest goals, and what are their biggest struggles? What are their biggest challenges when it comes to anything and everything that's going to lead to a natural conclusion that they need some consulting work around data center sustainability, data center energy? Once you know their goals and challenges in their own words, you'll be in a much better position to create a content calendar, to create an educational events calendar, to get your website copywriting aligned with what they care most about in their own words, your sales enablement, your email marketing, your social media. Your whole events strategy should center around educating and building trust with the right people in the right places at the right time, and most of all, in the right context, so they see you and your client-facing team members as the be-all, end-all experts when it comes to anything and everything having to do with data center energy sustainability. What this largely is going to come down to is motivating the most important people in these accounts to actually want to spend time with you, as opposed to you chasing them. And when you do that successfully, the need for repeat prospecting calls is going to disappear, because you've completely flipped the circumstances around. Instead of you being seen as a vendor that's trying to prospect them, you're instead having your client-facing team members, your account managers, your account executives, your marketers, your product managers, your channel partnership folks, they're instead showing up as teachers, as consultants, as subject matter experts, as trusted advisors, perhaps even thought leaders when it comes to anything and everything having to do with energy sustainability. And it's super important to recognize that in today's ecosystem for data centers, critical facilities, digital infrastructure, it's more important than ever for you to get in early and often. This self-driven, self-guided buyer's journey is a really big deal. 10 years ago, you could count on the fact that most of your prospects and clients, they'd get about halfway through the consideration set, halfway through research and decision-making when it comes to anything having to do with their professional responsibilities. And then at the halfway point, they would be willing to speak with someone from your sales team. Those days are long, long gone. We now live in a world where most of the typical buyer's journey is happening without you in the room if you keep following the default playbook. The default playbook excludes you from all but the final 17% of the typical buyer's journey. 83% of it is happening without you in the room. The way you get back into the room is to reposition, repackage, transform your client-facing team members so that they're able to successfully land in the early and middle stages of the journey for your most important stakeholders that care about energy sustainability. there's typically 28 touch points that are going to happen between a complete stranger and a considered purchase decision for something like energy sustainability consulting. So your mission, if you choose to accept it, is to have such fantastically valuable, fantastically relevant educational events that the most important stakeholders in these accounts are highly motivated to want to spend a considerable amount of time with client-facing members of your team. And these educational events are so amazingly helpful that they're also highly inclined to bring their peers, to bring their boss, to bring their colleagues along with them to these educational events. If it's possible to do these in person, they don't need to be super expensive propositions. If you have a conference room, if you have a classroom in your facility that holds 10, 20, 30, a few dozen people, lunch and learns, breakfast seminars can be amazingly impactful and cost very, very little for you to produce. All you're really talking about for breakfast is bring in bagels and pastries and coffee. For lunch, you don't have to go nuts on catering. The great part with this is you can be super precise. You're not at a conference where you're competing for attention with dozens of speakers and hundreds of other vendors. They are choosing to spend 60, 90 minutes, 2 hours, a half a day, whatever it is for your event, because you've dialed into so precisely about what matters most to them. That's why nailing that buyer persona research and using that for your event titles, your event headline, your copywriting is incredibly important. And you'll know this is working well when you start to see multiple stakeholders from the same company registering and attending your events. And when they attend your events together from the same company, you are proactively driving alignment across that team and other teams within that company, which is a huge part of what it means in today's ecosystem to be a successful account executive, is the project manager who drives collaboration, that helps empower the internal champion to drive alignment, to get that consulting engagement across the finish line so they can start working with your company. So that is the game-changing approach to get out of the vendor box and stay out of the vendor box once and for all. And when you do this well the first time and the second time and the third time, and you start to notice that, wow, the first time through, 3 people from this company came. The next time through, 5 people came from this company. After 5 people from that same company came to your second lunch and learn, one pulled you aside and said, wow, this is really helpful. We have a company retreat coming up next month. Can you just come on site and talk about this in person? We're going to have everyone there. And then it's just up to you to figure out if that is something that you want to do for free, similar to what you would do for your lunch and learn or educational events or webinar strategy, or whether that's something that should be packaged into a workshop that you offer as part of your consulting services. So at a high level, that is how I would approach the go-to-marketing, sales and marketing strategy when it comes to how a data center energy sustainability consultancy can lessen the need for repeat prospecting calls. If you're getting good value from this week's Data Center Go-To-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show, make sure that you hit the like button and help spread the word. If you have an idea for a topic, a question, a challenge that you think we should address in an upcoming show, make sure to drop that in the comments wherever you're watching. Okay, what do we got up next? This one is about edge data centers that often win because of proximity and latency and governance reasons. So how does an edge data center keep its pipeline full in distributed locations? How does an edge data center keep its pipeline full in distributed locations? That is a fabulous question. So what that means is you have multiple locations, several locations, which means your go-to-market playbook, your marketing and sales playbook needs to take that reality into account. So first up, we want to look at historically where you have been most successful in the past. Has your marketing and sales organization primarily been successful in selling edge computing, edge capacity to companies that are located nearby that location, or have they been more successful selling long distance, digitally, virtually, for companies that are not able to easily drive to your particular location? They're not, not within a 30 to 60 minute hyperlocal location of your edge facility. If you are favoring a long distance approach where you're recognizing that most of the reason that you're winning on edge is because your IT buyers recognize that they need proximity in your location, then your playbook should largely favor doing educational events, educational resources that can be consumed on demand and even live, but consumed virtually without someone having to travel to your location where you have this edge facility. If they are able to travel, then you're going to simply take this the same approach, but in person. You're trying primarily to get people to come into your facility and attend an educational event in your classroom, in your conference room, and then bundle that in together with touring your facility. And if you have the right people in the right seats and you're providing good value to them, that alone will lead to a lot of great sales opportunities and keep your pipeline quite full. As long as you're providing great educational value and they see you as experts and you get out of the vendor box. For most edge data centers that have multiple distributed locations, at some point, in addition to the hyperlocal work that you do, you're going to need a long distance approach. And that long distance approach really just depends on across how many geographies, how long distance it is. Are you crossing time zones? Are you crossing nations? Are you crossing continents? Do you need to provide educational resources, educational events in more than just English and multiple languages? Again, that's all going to come down to how well defined your ideal client profile is. So where do they tend to be located? Are they all within a same country? Are you winning primarily because of governance issues, but being able to provide a much more precise place in terms of them needing extreme low latency? In other words, it's not enough for them to just be in your region or be in your city, but they need to be in this specific location because they have a location, they have an office, they have a facility that's located a couple hundred feet or a couple hundred meters away from where you're located, where they're doing something that's very latency intensive, like with IoT or with AI or EVs or smart cities or something like that. So yeah, being really, really self-aware about where they're located, how big or small their companies tend to be. You know what your minimums are, right? So how big does a company need to be to afford that minimum? Can you truly sell to startups, pre-revenue startups with 1 to 10 employees, maybe even 11 to 50 employees, or do you need to set the prospecting or the qualification floor at like 50 plus employees? And conversely, can you truly sell your distributed edge solutions to huge companies, huge multinational companies, or do you tap out at somewhere like 1,000 employees? And again, only you can answer that question based on where you've achieved product market fit and go to market fit. But yeah, you need to, in order to be able to keep your pipeline full of qualified prospects, qualified sales opportunities, you need a lot of clarity on where they're located, how big or small their companies are. And are there certain industries where you tend to win more often than others, where you do better at onboarding and retention and expansion? If you do, and you know that, for sure, include that in your ideal client profile. If there's certain industries that have been a nightmare to work with, you also need to know that, because that's an exclusion that you would take into account with how you structure your ad campaigns, how you do your outbound prospecting, the drop-down lists on your lead generation forms, the filters and the views within your CRM, your customer relationship management system. Obviously, the segments that are a really good fit for you certainly are worthy of having their own page on your website and some real estate on your website navigation and homepage, perhaps even their own lead generation offers, their own nurturing, maybe even their own sales team. That's a very common approach that we see among a lot of data center operators now, is they're segmenting their sales organization based on vertical expertise so that their account executives, their sales development reps, are able to show up and truly act more as consultants and less like their traditional job titles. So for an edge data center to keep its pipeline full in distributed locations, know what those locations are, know who the companies are, know who the individuals are and what they care about. That primary buyer persona, the most important economic stakeholder, the secondary buyer persona, the second most important kind of economic stakeholder, and what their biggest goals and challenges are that lead them to the conclusion in the coming days, in the coming weeks, and in the coming months that they're going to need your kind of edge computing. And the better job you can do with understanding what those goals and challenges are in their own words, the better job you can do with intercepting them really, really early on in the journey, when there's a really strong chance for you to frame the conversation, to frame the criteria that they use to evaluate all of the different options that are in front of them going forward when it comes to edge computing. Think about 28 touch points between complete stranger and purchase decision. The better job you do at showing up in multiple touch points, the better job you can do of motivating, incentivizing them to want to actually spend time with client-facing members of your team, because they're learning so much from you. The more likely it is that they start to bring their coworkers with them. So collectively, they learn from you, and you proactively are driving alignment across that team, across other teams in that company, when it comes to all of the IT infrastructure issues that lead to a edge computing need at some point in the near future. So if you want to keep your pipeline full in distributed locations, here's what's most important. Know what they care about throughout the full buyer's journey, not just at the end when they're just about ready to buy, but know what the issues are that are going to lead to them wanting to spend time with you throughout the buyer's journey, in the context of seeing your client-facing team members as the be-all, end-all experts, the subject matter experts when it comes to anything and everything having to do with edge computing. The better job you do at that, the easier it is to keep your pipeline full.
The Data Center Go-to-Market podcast is sponsored by DCSMI, elevating the role of sales, marketing, and go-to-market GTM professionals in the growth of the data center industry. To stay informed about upcoming episodes, make sure that you subscribe to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter on the DCSMI website that can be found at www.dcsmi.com. Again, that URL is www.dcsmi.com.
Hey, it's Joshua Feinberg from DCSMI, the Data Center Sales and Marketing Institute, and we're thrilled to have you joining us for this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show. So what's up next? What's our next question that we're going to be addressing this week? It is, how do we grow a high availability colocation data center business? How do we grow a high availability colocation data center business? I think what's super important to recognize is that colocation is now a very, very mature product category. It's been around for well over 10 years. There's a lot of companies in that space with insane amounts of capital and insane amounts of scale. And depending on your company's size, you need to be very, very self-aware about where you can win and where you're not the best fit. And the way you're typically going to figure that out is looking at where you've been most successful. What are the logos on the website, the testimonials, the reviews, the case studies, looking in your CRM, your customer relationship management system. Where do you have the happiest clients, the highest net promoter score, the ones that expand the most naturally, the ones that have been with you the longest, they're profitable, you love working with them. Get really specific on that, and then get that baked into your ideal client profile. So you know geographically where you can win, how big or small these companies are, the industries that they tend to be located in, and then that will drive your account-based approach, account-based marketing, your target account list, and that will also drive what you decide to do with segmenting those companies into the stakeholders that matter most and prioritizing the stakeholders that matter most, that primary buyer persona, the secondary buyer persona designation, and knowing what each of those categories of stakeholders care most about. That client centricity is going to become a huge part of what you're going to want to think about going forward with how your digital presence shows up, how your client-facing team members show up, and how they position themselves. Do they still show up looking like account executives and sales development reps, business development reps, marketers, account managers? If so, you may be more behind the curve than you realize, because at the end of the day, you're in a mature commoditized category, and it's incredibly important to differentiate. One of the best ways the companies are choosing to differentiate is they're getting closer to their clients, understanding the value that they truly provide for specific segments within the market. And in most cases, as soon as it is financially feasible, we see sales organizations among colocation providers segmenting by size, as well as segmenting by industry. In other words, they're trying to figure out how heavy of a sales process do you run based on the size of the client? And for SMBs, for small and medium-sized businesses, if you're selling a very commoditized colocation product or service, a lot of colocation operators are coming to the conclusion that this is a self-service sign-up. Essentially, it's e-commerce on your website, and it's a product marketing challenge just to get that marketing, to get that sales process right, to get the onboarding right, so it can be as low touch as possible, because you're selling that colocation at a relatively low price point that butts up against the upper end of the range of web hosting, another very, very mature commoditized space within infrastructure as a service. If you're selling to mid-market, if you're selling to enterprise, then you typically would segment it into different teams based on the anticipated average deal size, the anticipated length of the sales cycle, the average number of stakeholders that are involved. You'll typically segment into mid-market versus enterprise. And within those segments, it's also quite common to find colocation operators that are dividing up where possible into industry specialization. In other words, they have teams, they have account executives that just focus on financial services or healthcare or manufacturing or e-commerce. And one area that's incredibly important to colocation operators that I haven't yet mentioned is an area that specializes in working with other IT providers, managed service providers, MSPs. That's usually handled quite differently. That's usually handled outside of the realm of a traditional account executive sales development type of role, and handled in a channel partner part of your company. In other words, you set up channel marketing, you set up channel account managers, you set up channel consultants. And again, it's about, you still need to educate and build trust. It could be an even longer sales cycle because you're typically competing for attention with those MSPs among a lot of different channel partner programs that they participate in. And even once they get on board, it's not the finish line, it's just another starting line, because now you need to onboard them, you need to enable them, you need to activate them and get them excited about introducing your company's colocation offering to their existing client base. And as their client base grows, continuing to find a natural way to infuse introducing your value proposition to their clients. They essentially become an extension of your marketing team, of your sales team, of your onboarding team, of your services team. So that all requires a different strategy than a lot of colocation providers are going after right now. For especially among small single location providers, we see many that go to one extreme or the other. They're either doing a hyper-local approach that focuses 100% on events marketing, and they're basically running marketing and sales like nothing changed over the last 10 years. Then we see another segment that basically markets their facility like they're selling co-working for servers. And I say that half seriously, half jokingly, but it's kind of like they're running a co-working facility. And instead of you physically coming and working there, your servers come and physically plug in and take advantage of the power and the cooling and the connectivity. At the end of the day, the colocation operators that seem to be the most successful have transformed themselves from getting beyond just selling the real estate to being seen as IT services companies. They're offering a lot of amenities, they're offering a lot of add-on managed services and remote services, and they're truly seen as a technology partner. And that changes the nature of how they hire, because what that means is your account executives, your account managers really need to be technology experts, infrastructure experts, so they can have really deep, insightful conversations with your prospects and clients. And your prospects and clients actually want to spend time with folks on your client-facing team. So in most cases, these are big, big cultural changes for a lot of colocation operators, deciding whether you want to focus on growing locally, whether you want to grow long distance. You really, in most cases, should be doing both. There's clients that love server hugging. There's clients that need your location. That it's not a car ride, it's a plane ride plus a car ride to get to your facility. So you need a really different kind of playbook. But if you're looking to grow both local and long distance, those are usually two different kinds of talent. If you're looking to grow direct accounts and channel partner accounts, again, those are usually two different kinds of talent. And if you really want to do this well, at some point, you're likely going to segment your marketing and sales depending on the size of the account, whether it's SMB, small, medium-sized business versus mid-market or enterprise. And you may further segment at least mid-market, definitely enterprise, by vertical, by industry specialization. So you have experts on your team in financial services, in healthcare, in manufacturing, whatever segments that you are going after. So those are my insights on how a high availability colocation data center business can be growing its client base in the coming months and in the coming years. If you're getting good value from this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show, make sure to hit the like button and help spread the word. If you have an idea for a topic, a question, a challenge that you think we should be addressing in an upcoming show, make sure to leave that in the comments and we'll add that to the consideration queue. Okay, what do we have up? What's our next question? How do we build a robust modular data center sales pipeline? How do we build a robust sales pipeline for a modular data center business? That is a terrific question. Because when it comes to modular data centers, you're essentially running a factory. You're constructing these modular data centers and they need to get shipped, they need to get delivered to a certain location. So you will almost certainly have a geographic component to your ideal client profile of where it's practical for you to be able to deliver and install and support service these modular data center locations. You'll also likely find that their company size some company sizes will be a better fit than others. Realistically, are you able to sell and ship and service profitably enterprise accounts of unlimited size? In other words, they could be a Fortune 50, a Fortune 500 company and still get great value from your modular data centers. Or do you tap out at somewhere around 1,000 employee company or a 5,000 employee company? And along the same lines, what's the minimum company size that they really need to be to afford your entry level modular data center solution? So that'll help give a lot of clarity on the geographic part and the company size part of your ideal client profile. And then are there certain industries that are better fit than others based on your existing client base where you've achieved product market fit? Once you have an idea with that for building up that sales pipeline, you'll be able to define your addressable market. You should be able to build out a target account list, potentially divvy up those target accounts to different members of your sales team. And then you need to figure out whether you're going to sell commoditized modular data centers or whether you want to actually be seen as the expert and the preferred provider, the preferred deliverer of modular data center solutions. If you want to be the low-cost provider, if you want to just compete on price, then you're going to need a lot of scale, you're going to need a lot of capital, and be prepared that your existing team members may not have a ton of professional gratification if they're working for a company that doesn't see itself as tremendously differentiated and just wants to be the low-cost provider. For most modular data center providers, they typically want to have strong points of differentiation. The challenge is most modular data center providers are only thinking differentiation at the tail end of the journey, when in reality, the self-driven buyer's journey is a really, really big deal. And I think that's what's throwing most companies in this segment for a curveball. What is the self-driven buyer's journey all about? The self-driven buyer's journey means essentially that your prospects and clients are doing so much research on their own before they ever get to an initial meeting with someone from your team that their research and decision-making process is almost over before you meet a potential client. Almost over. Gartner found 83% of a typical journey is now over before someone is meeting with a member of your sales team for the first time. 83%. It didn't used to be this far over. It used to be 10 years ago that about half of that research and decision-making process was over before vendor contact or sales contact. At the time, CEB, the Corporate Executive Board, did research with Serious Decisions and Salesforce and found that 56% of a typical journey was over before vendor contact and sales contact. We're now at 83%, and it's only shifting more and more to the right. So if you sell to highly technical IT professionals, facilities professionals, developers, very, very highly educated, skeptical, cynical, not big fans of marketing and sales, you need to work extra hard to earn your way in early and often in the right places at the right time with the right people, and most of all, in the right context, so that you and your client-facing team members are seen as the be-all, end-all experts when it comes to anything and everything having to do with modular data centers. And it's not easy. It's a hyper-competitive marketplace. You're not only competing for attention against other builders of modular data centers, you're competing against every other direct, indirect, and non-business model competitor that creates content and educational events around topics that are of interest to your most important prioritized buyer personas. So get really clear on who they are, what they care about, what their biggest goals and challenges are, and figure out who on your team, internally or externally, is going to be in the best position to show up as the teachers, as the consultants, as the subject matter experts, as the trusted advisors that are going to help speak at, facilitate, host these kinds of educational events. Sure, at some point, you're going to want your prospects and clients to walk through your modular data centers, to walk through your factory where you build these modular data centers. But a leading indicator for a much wider part of the funnel is people that are interested in all the topics and all the education, the professional development, the learning and development experiences that are a leading indicator of someone being a highly interested buyer of modular data centers a couple of days, a couple of weeks, maybe even a couple of months down the road. And the more you can show up early and often, the more likely it is that you're going to start to see multiple stakeholders from the same company showing up to your webinars, showing up to your lunch and learn, showing up to your breakfast seminars, showing up to your symposia, showing up to your educational events. And education is the reason why they're spending time with you. There will be certain people that are ready for the tour, but most people, the much wider part of the funnel, is people that are learning. And the better job you can do with inserting yourself into that learning process, the better job you're going to be with building a robust sales pipeline for modular data centers. So figure out, are you primarily winning when they're local? Are you just as often winning when they're long distance? If it's split 50-50, you're almost certainly going to need a hyper-local go-to-market, a hyper-local marketing and sales playbook that's optimized around the people that are located within a 30 to 60-minute drive and getting more of them to come visit you for learning with you. That's bundled into touring your facility and walking through modular data centers. But they're not, most of the time, not coming just for that. They're coming to learn. And the better job you can do with creating this environment where they learn together, where multiple people from the same company, they learn with other people in your ecosystem and other people in your community, the what's in it for them is way, way more appealing for them. The more challenging part of the marketing and sales and go-to-market playbook is how to do this long distance. And in most cases, it's starting with virtual events. It's starting with webinars and virtual tours. But at some point, maybe it's a roadshow and you're taking a modular data center with you on the road, and that's parked in the parking lot of the restaurant or the hotel where you're hosting your breakfast seminar or your lunch and learn event, and following them learning all about the best practices for how to make the best digital infrastructure decisions and how to integrate the modular data centers into their existing infrastructure, and what all of this looks like big picture for this particular person in this kind of company, in this geographic region, this particular industry. And immediately following that, you take them, walk them through the modular data center that is out in the park. There's a lot of creative ways to do this, but at the end of the day, the first decision point is where you've won most often, how you're going to get more people like that to want to spend time with members of your client-facing team members early and often, so that you own that relationship throughout the full buyer's journey. So you're not just chasing them at the end and being forced to the race to the bottom with competing on price. So the idea is to show up in a way so that your account executives, your sales development reps, your marketers, your product managers, your channel partners, managers, your executive team are seen as the be-all, end-all experts, not just because you've won these awards and these distinctions and have these great case studies, but the experts about all of the adjacent areas that are leading indicators that someone, the right person, is going to be highly motivated to want your modular data centers at some time in the very near future. And we want to provide such a great world-class learning and development environment that not only they keep coming back, but they bring their coworkers, They bring their colleagues from their team, from other teams. They bring their boss with them. So you're driving alignment throughout that full buyer's journey. So by the time they're at the decision stage where they're ready for a sales conversation, not only have you guaranteed that you're staying on the short list, when you do this well, the short list may have collapsed down to the point where you are literally last company standing on that short list, and you've, for all intents and purposes, won. And you know that you have won that competitive battle because the first time you're actually talking to them in a sales context, they are literally quoting your methodology that you taught them about how to evaluate this category. You've made such a big impact on multiple stakeholders from this company that they've essentially used your educational resources and your educational events as their methodology, as their criteria that they've used to navigate this whole process. So that is how to build a robust sales pipeline for a modular data center company. And that brings us to our final question for this week's data center go-to-market sales and marketing Q&A show. If you've got good value from this week's show, make sure that you hit the like button. If you have an idea for a topic, a question, a challenge that you think we should address in an upcoming show, make sure to drop that in the comments. And if you want to make sure that you get notified about upcoming educational events and resources just like this, make sure that you are subscribed to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter that comes to your email inbox each Sunday. You can subscribe. You can sign up right on our website at www.dcsmi.com. So what is the final question for this week? How does an energy efficient data center solutions company generate inbound opportunities? So how does a company that provides energy efficient data centers generate inbound opportunities? That is a terrific question. And by inbound opportunities, just to make sure we're on the same page, this typically involves someone filling out a form on your website, raising their hand and saying, I want to learn, or I want to talk to someone from your team about energy efficient data center solutions. Now, the reason that there is a distinction is a lot of people in sales and marketing roles at data center providers, data center operators that are energy efficient are really confusing those two different scenarios. But if you're going to win in this space, it's really important to be super clear about what's truly going on in the marketplace. You see, 10 years ago, it was very common when someone was looking for data center facilities or really anything IT related, that they would do quite a bit of research online and they would hit a point where they felt like they were hitting a brick wall. They didn't really truly understand what to do next. They got to about the halfway point and they said, okay, now I'm ready to meet with someone from your sales team. I'll take a meeting with a sales development rep or an account executive to learn more. Add in 10 years of digital transformation, tons of people that have experienced the transformative value of a great webinar, of attending a great educational event, of watching great YouTube videos, of watching great podcast events, of fantastic thought leadership educational resources. People have gotten used to getting exactly what they want 100% on their terms. And it turns out that highly educated, highly technical, skeptical, cynical IT buyers don't want to hang around with salespeople that can't add a lot of value to their world. And because of that, they've pushed back to the point where now the most recent research from Gartner found that 83% of a typical journey is over before sales contact, before vendor contact. That means that your prospects and clients don't want to meet with anyone until they're in the final 17%, until they're headed to the finish line, just about ready to buy. However, in that first 83%, there are companies that perhaps are direct competitors of yours or indirect competitors of yours, or maybe even non-business model competitors of yours that are getting in early and often, that are shaping the criteria that your prospects and clients use to decide how and if and when they're going to invest in energy efficient data center solutions. So your goal is to be at the top of the short list for the experts that they want to talk to when it comes to anything and everything having to do with energy efficient data center solutions. And the way you do that is to really understand what's going on in their world. And this starts with getting really precise about what kind of company they come from. Because unless you are a huge multinational global company, you're not going to have the resources to try to boil the ocean yourself. You're going to need to get a lot more specific about where you're going to go fishing, where you're going to go hunting, whatever you want to call this, for prospecting, for lead generation. And the smaller your company is, the more incredibly important it is for you to have lots of laser precision. And the input for this laser precision is going to come from looking at where you've been most successful in the past. When we look at your case studies, when we look at the logos on your homepage, when we look at your testimonials, your reviews, what do your most successful, happiest clients have in common? Where are they located? How big or small are their companies? And what industries do they tend to be located within? That's going to give your ideal client profile some really, really key clarity about where you should focus your inbound lead generation and inbound sales acceleration efforts, where you've been most successful in the past. So aside from those public-facing assets that we see in your digital front, we also want to look in your CRM. Who has the highest net promoter score? Who's been with you the longest? Who's the most profitable? Who's best aligned with where you're going as a company? Again, at the end of the day, we want clarity at a company level and an account level of who we want more of. From there, you should be able to build a target account list of a defined list of usually a few hundred. Some cases it's a few dozen or fewer. Sometimes it's a few thousand companies that fit that definition. Really, really crisp list, defined list of who we want our future clients to be. That's incredibly important for dialing in your inbound lead gen opportunity, your lead gen strategy. Now that we have our ideal client profile and our target account list in place, who cares the most in these companies about energy efficiency data center solutions? And your answer is going to vary depending on your business model, how big or small you are, how all-encompassing or how tightly focused your product roadmap is, and how big or small their company is. For energy efficiency, is it an environmental, social, governance kind of person? Is it an ESG kind of person? Is it a compliance person? Is it an infrastructure person? Is it a finance person? Is it an engineer? Again, is it a facilities manager? Only you can answer that question, but we need clarity about who the stakeholders are that care most about what you do. And we need to prioritize based on who's going to have the biggest economic impact on that decision committee. The most important person, we'll call that your primary buyer persona. The second most important person, we'll call your secondary buyer persona. And especially among those two prioritized segments, we got to know what they care about in their own words. What are their biggest goals? What are their biggest challenges? And their goals and their challenges in their own words is your strategy for what needs to be on your website, what needs to be on your landing pages, what needs to be in your email, what needs to be in your ads, what needs to be in your social, what needs to be in your events strategy, what they care about in their own words. And the better job you do at that, the more effective your inbound lead generation strategy is going to be. So we need to know at a company level who they are, at the individual people level, who the most important segments are, who the most important buyer personas are, and within those segments, what they care about. And then everything that we do going forward with our inbound strategy is about supporting those people throughout their full buyer's journey. This is something that a lot of people mess up, so I want you to pay really close attention to. For you to be effective, you need to get in early and you need to get in often. This isn't one and done. And if we wait to the point that they're going to a search engine or a chatbot or LLM and typing in your geographic location and your business category, in most cases, it's usually too late. So we need to know what are the topics, what are the goals, what are the challenges, what are the stressors that lead someone a couple of days, a couple of weeks, maybe even a couple of months from now to the very natural conclusion as they get further along in the journey that they need what you offer. And the better job you can do with intercepting them early and often, the better it's going to be for you. Your product data sheets, your product information is not enough. It hasn't been enough on its own for a really, really long time. But now more than ever in the self-driven buyer's journey, we need to know who they are, what they care about, and we need to intercept them as early as possible So they're highly motivated to want to spend time with your client-facing team members outside of the context of seeing you as just a vendor. In other words, they need to see your account managers, your account executives, your marketers, your product managers, your channel partner managers. They need to see you as experts on energy efficiency data center solutions. So they need to be learning from you. So great webinars, great downloadable resources, great lunch and learns, great educational workshops, anything you can do that motivates the most important people in those accounts to want to spend significant amounts of time with your client-facing team members on an ongoing basis. It is incredibly important for you to show up as the teacher, as the consultant, as the expert, as the trusted advisor, and perhaps even the thought leaders. This is a really, really important part of inbound lead generation, inbound opportunity generation going forward, is getting you in early and often and impressing on the folks that you're reaching early that they're going to want to spend time with your team members throughout their full journey because they're learning so much from you. And this is, again, where being hyper specific about who they are and what they care about is really, really important. This is also why, when it comes to inbound opportunities, it's usually way more conducive for you to host your own events as opposed to leaning on other people's events. Why? Because once you've dialed in your ideal client profile and your preferred buyer personas, why would you want to put yourself in the hands of an event where your prioritized buyer personas are only 10 or 15 or 20% of the audience? And what you're talking about is going to completely not resonate with the 80% that doesn't fit in. It's wasted efforts. If you want 100% of the audience to be your primary buyer persona and 100% of a different audience to be your secondary buyer persona and have them perfectly aligned with your ideal client profile, you really need to be creating and promoting and hosting your own events. And the great news with that is it's likely a lot less expensive than sponsoring and showing up at other people's events. It has much more precision and you have their undivided attention, and you can do this over and over again. And you can do a lot more of this because the cost of doing this is so much lower. So this is where, if you're in a position where you have your own classroom in your facility, if you have a conference room, and again, these can be small events. These can be, you could have 10, 15, 20 perfect people attending, like from 3 or 4 different companies, multiple stakeholders from the same companies, and get a ton of value out of learning from you. Now, this should not be confused with social and brand building events. Sure, if you take those same 20 people, there is some value of inviting them to a lavish hospitality suite at a sporting event, at a football game, at a basketball game, at a hockey match, at a baseball game, or something like that. But just understand the social and the networking is not education and trust building. It's just affinity. It's just a strong, positive brand halo. If you want to be able to transform people's beliefs and behaviors, they need to see you as an expert, not just a company that took them to a great event or sponsored a golf tournament or had a great party. And this is, again, where a lot of people are getting completely off track in data centers and digital infrastructure and critical facilities. Is in order, if you're in the transformation business, in order to motivate people to change their behavior, they have to see you and your client-facing team members as experts. You got to get out of the vendor box and stay out of the vendor box and stop just focusing on the transaction, focus on the relationship. And the great relationship isn't going to revolve around you throwing great parties. The great relationship is going to start by them seeing and respecting your client-facing team members as the go-to experts in your space when it comes to anything and everything having to do with energy efficient data center solutions. So that's how I would approach how a energy efficient data center solutions company can generate inbound opportunities. Show up as the teacher, the consultant, the subject matter expert, the trusted advisor, and the thought leader, so that the perfect person, the perfect stakeholder is highly motivated to want to spend lots of time with you, and they keep bringing more and more people from their team along in that journey. So that is the final question that I will be addressing in this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show. If you got good value from this week's show, make sure that you hit the like button. If you have a topic, a question, a challenge that you think we should address in an upcoming show, make sure to leave that in the comments. And if we are not already connected on LinkedIn, feel free to send me a connect request. Mention that you watched the Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show, and I'd be thrilled to be connected with you. Just make sure to customize the invite so I know the context of which you're sending me the connect invite. I'm Joshua Feinberg from DCSMI, the Data Center Sales and Marketing Institute, and we're thrilled that you were able to join us for this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show, and we look forward to hearing your success stories and seeing you back again next week. Take care now, and hope you have a great rest of your day, great rest of your week, and great success in and around data centers, critical facilities, and digital infrastructure.
The Data Center Go-to-Market podcast is sponsored by DCSMI, elevating the role of sales, marketing, and go-to-market GTM professionals in the growth of the data center industry. To stay informed about upcoming episodes, make sure that you subscribe to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter on the DCSMI website that can be found at www.dcsmi.com. Again, that URL is www.dcsmi.com.